Hi, everyone. The story of Paul is culminating to its end here in the book of Acts. As we look at Acts 26 today, he's drawing ever nearer to Rome to stand before Caesar. And the Jewish rulers in chapter 5 were trying to get Paul back to Jerusalem, most likely to kill him, as they did Jesus. But Paul, because he's a Roman citizen, is able to appeal to Caesar, which means that his case will be looked at by the emperor. And the emperor at this time is Nero, actually. And Nero reigned from 54 AD until 68 AD. So most likely this story is happening around AD 59. And that's important because the detail in these chapters here in the book of Acts of specific individuals in specific locations is typical of Luke in his writing. He puts us right into the historical narrative. He mentions three people in particular in this passage: Festus, King Agrippa, and Agrippa's sister Bernice. These are all true historical figures who reigned at the time of this story. There's other historical texts that mention these people. And so let me tell you a little bit about each of them. Festus replaced Felix as governor of Palestine around the summer of AD 59. Now, Festus would only serve a year or two in Palestine before his death. So Paul, because he's in Caesarea, he's under trial with Felix, but then he has to wait until Festus is installed, and then Paul has to share his entire story all over again to the new governor. And now King Agrippa, he was Jewish, but loyal to Rome. He was so loyal to Rome, even though he was Jewish, he made a coin in AD 89 commemorating Rome's triumph over the Jewish rebels. The historian Josephus recorded that Agrippa visited Roman officials often. So suffice it to say, he is not beloved by the Jews in Palestine, where Agrippa reigns. And he's considered a pawn by the Romans. And so he's an interesting individual for sure. And then King Agrippa's sister is Bernice. And Bernice later became the mistress to Titus, the Roman general who besieged Jerusalem. And when Titus became emperor, there was this scandal about him consorting with a Jewish woman. It was Bernice. And he was forced to put her away. And she left Rome brokenhearted. The historians tell us that she was actually 15 years older than Titus. Anyway, it's all very interesting because the majority of Acts 26 is Paul sharing his story with these three individuals. It's kind of a tribunal of sorts. And I love that Luke puts us right into this story with real people in real locations at a real time. In essence, Paul shares his story with this tribunal of the death and resurrection of Jesus. And he's sharing about the death and resurrection of Jesus and what Jesus has done in Paul's life. And Festus interrupts Paul. Look at verse 24. Suddenly Festus shouted, "Paul, you are insane. Too much study has made you crazy." But Paul replied, "I am not insane, most excellent Festus. What I am saying is the sober truth. And King Agrippa knows about these things. I speak boldly, for I am sure these events are all familiar to him, for they were not done in a corner." Paul's saying that King Agrippa, the king of Palestine, was certainly aware of the crucifixion of Christ and the emergence of the church. It was not, Paul's saying it wasn't done in a corner. And so then he looks at King Agrippa and he says, "King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do." And then Agrippa interrupted him and says, "Do you think you can persuade me to become a Christian so quickly?" And then Paul, he says something so important that reveals his motivation and so critical for us in our situation. It's the reason why Paul stayed in a Roman prison in Caesarea, why he allowed himself to be persecuted throughout the book of Acts, why he keeps pressing toward Rome, the epicenter of the known world at that time. And we find it in verse 29. Paul replies to Agrippa, "Whether quickly or not, I pray to God that both you and everyone here in this audience might become the same as I am, except for these chains." You see, Paul's driving motivation for everything he did was that people would embrace Jesus as the Son of God who died for their sins and rose again to give us life here and now and life eternal. You know, as I think about my own story, this question that he asks Agrippa is really important. Do you believe? I accepted Jesus into my life when I was in the second grade. I'm a preacher's kid, and so I served him my whole life. In my whole adult life, I've served him as a pastor. But after my son died almost 4 years ago, I struggled with my faith, and because of the love of Jesus, because he promised to prepare a place for us in heaven, because without faith, I have no idea what has happened to my son or to my brother or to my dad or to the hundreds of people I love that have passed from this life to the next. But because of faith, because I choose to believe over and over again that Jesus is resurrected and that he's in heaven preparing a place for all of us. And so every day I choose to believe again. And so the question is, do you believe? Do you want to believe? You can ask Jesus right now to come into your life, to tell him that you are choosing to follow him and his way of love, to receive his forgiveness and mercy. You can do that right now. In church, I'm praying that God would give us boldness in these days to share our stories of how Jesus has changed our lives and is changing our lives. That we would have the boldness to share what he's done, and then ask the question to our friends, to our family: do you believe? Do you want to believe? I hope that everyone would be as I am, except for these chains. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you this weekend.